Hope you will allow me, on behalf of the good people and good parliamentarians who are most concerned about the state of the nation, to paint a different picture. I have seen people outside this House, people like Jeff Lloyd, people like the Volunteer Bahamas program, which we started just prior to us demanding office, Mr. Speaker, and other volunteers, people like Sheila Pritchard, people like John Morley's daughter, people like people like, what's the guy's name? Brown, Mr. Brown, who was a former gangster. They're volunteering their time in Baintown, Mr. Speaker. People like young entrepreneurs investing in themselves, investing in our country. People like school teachers, people like fishermen, nurses, doctors, people like police officers who volunteer their time to work with young men and young women in their communities. They mobilize them, Mr. Speaker, to address the problems that our government can no longer fix. The name that evaded me was Valentino Brown, Mr. Speaker. People, Mr. Speaker, that have a bigger vision for their country. What I envision is an opposition first, and eventually a government that speaks on behalf of these people, that gives them a voice not only in the communities where they are working and volunteering, but in this House of Assembly, the People's House. For them and through them, for the benefit of all Bahamians, we must, instead of this patchwork initiative proposed by the government, focus single-mindedly on the problems that plague us most. How to enforce existing laws against criminals and take steps to prevent future crimes. How to support those who wish to grow our economy and create jobs, whether they do it in partnership with our government or through their own entrepreneurship. How to work with teachers, students, and experts in education to reform a system which supports learning, self-confidence, self-discipline, and self-actualization for every Bahamian child. And finally, Mr. Speaker, how to challenge ourselves as parliamentarians of all stripes and persuasions to lead more proactively, to deliver better policy, to listen more carefully, to act more transparently, and to obey rules of procedure, disclosure, and ethics more diligently than we have. We must heed the call of our people. You see, Mr. Speaker, when the FNM was first started, all together was the slogan of the FNMs. The intent was to send the message that unlike the PLP, the FNM was reaching out to all Bahamians without regard to race, religion, or political persuasions, assuring all, one and all, that the party would protect the rights of every citizen and guarantee that none would be denied. Entitlements provided by law or by public policy. Over the many years, the party has in fact remained true to these principles. It is our commitment, when we create better for our Bahamian, that this policy is adhered to and enhanced where necessary. Mr. Speaker, before I take my seat, you know, over the course of my few years here in this place, I can't boast of being here generations and tons of years, but just over my brief time of service in this parliament, I may have said, or I may have done something that may have offended some people or ruffled their feathers of some. That may not have been my intent, even to you, Mr. Speaker. And so today, I assure you, Mr. Speaker, that this has been a real learning experience. See, one thing I want to say, Mr. Speaker, I never lose.
Members.
I never lose. I learn. And so when I learn, I make myself better, Mr. Speaker. I never lose. I learn. I look at me. You see some of the transformation, but now you're going to hear some of it, okay? So, Mr. Speaker, we make mistakes, but you know what? When you learn from that mistake, you stand back That's why me and Yamacraw, we solve our differences differently. That's why me and Angliston, we solve our differences differently. That's why me and Sea Breeze, one day it can be me and Michael. And I can tell you, there's no difference on this side. You see, this is unity, Mr. Speaker. All right. And so, Mr. Speaker, a new F&M, Mr. Speaker. We are going to critically analyze the current frightening level of criminal activity, especially armed robbery, murders, and all of the crimes. Because, Mr. Speaker, we're going to ensure that law enforcement officers, whether they be police or otherwise, they are going to have state-of-the-art crime-fighting resources. We're not just going to seek to apprehend criminals. We are going to seek to ensure that we prevent crime. Yes, Golden Gates, that's the sort of thing we can do. Mr. Speaker, in closing, the member for Yamacraw is back. And I want to share with her just a few thoughts. And we have both sat in that seat. You see, from a social service perspective, we must, Yamacraw, build on the family unit, the community, the church, and the schools. They must, and I know you agree with me, they must carry out their fundamental duty of socialization. We must bring together all of our youth groups, our civic groups, and our volunteer groups to assist in a program that is going to help to change schools. We have to increase preschools by utilizing church halls and other facilities that are available during the day. Primary school children and other young students, they are at risk, and we have got to ensure that we try to keep them within the precincts of the school, at least until their parents can collect them. Mr. Speaker, when you talk about 21st century ways of addressing issues and social issues, you look around the corporate world in America today, and Mr. Speaker, there are more and more daycare centers being placed in the workplace. And you know why they're being placed in the workplace? So that the mothers and fathers can know where their children are and they can go and visit them. And if we are doing it here now, we need to do more of it, because there are too many parents that do not know where their children are. And that is a huge crux of what we face in our social problems. Mr. Speaker, we need more social workers and counselors in primary schools and in preschools, because that is where we get the first glimpse into the dysfunction that they are living every day. Mr. Speaker, we must do it for our children and for our future. Emphasis, Mr. Speaker, must be on character building, on discipline, and on training along with conflict resolution. And so, Madam Minister, through you, Mr. Speaker, to the member for Yamacraw, I implore you, in good faith, please let us together try to make some of these things happen. You see, Mr. Speaker, we must heed the call of our people. We must earn their confidence. We must change. To earn their respect, we must radically transform, like me. To encourage their hope, we must bring forward a plan to turn our country around. And so, Mr. Speaker, I implore the member for Angliston that when she uses those IDB funds, that she includes Long Island in that short list. And let us start to use some of those technical, computerized systems where you don't have to have the police officers and everyone there. And they're pilot friendly, I'm told. They're using them in Hawaii. We can use them in Long Island. We can help to make your job a little easier if you help to give us an airport. And so, not only do we need that airport, we're so glad to know that the CDB has agreed to give us a loan for water. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to tell you a lie. Last week, one water truck was towing the next water truck. And the only way that people in Long Island at the southern end and at the northern end could get water is through bulk delivery. Now, Mr. Speaker, I believe we could do better than that. So I'm waiting for that loan to hurry up and come through. Because you know, Mr. Speaker, the member from my Cal stood up at Regatta last year. The member from my Cal stood up at the Long Island Regatta last year.
Members?
When it's quiet down, I will tell you what he told my people in Long
Members?
Island.
Members? Yeah.
The member for my cow
Member?
said that we would have water this year. And so the people for Long Island, of Long Island, are still waiting on that water. And so I encourage them. Water is essential, you know, water is essential, and roads are essential, and airports are essential, and seaports are essential, and let me tell you, there are so many other essentials. And so I am asking, on behalf of my people who sent me here, that we can get that. And so, Mr. Speaker, on each of these measures, Mr. Speaker, our government's budget fell short for the moment. The rest of us can no longer afford to fall short. There is only one way through this crisis, Mr. Speaker. Just like I told you, our first slogan was all together. And so I look to the slogan of the Bahamas: forward, upward, onward, together. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Long Island thanks you.
Honorable members, honorable, thank you, honorable member. I must say you brought a smile to my face today. I don't smile too often in this place. The chair recognized the honorable member for Long Island.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to begin by thanking you for allowing me to have this opportunity. As I always say, Mr. Speaker, whenever I stand on my feet in this place, I do so on behalf of the amazing, wonderful people of Long Island, and today is no different. Mr. Speaker, it is always my pleasure to come here to represent their views and their desires and everything that they share with me that I come and share with the public. Mr. Speaker, just before I get into the gist of the actual contribution with regards to the budget, I would just like to spend a little time with regards to my constituency, if with your leave, sir. Mr. Speaker, every time I stand to my feet during members' statements, I feel like I'm reading an obituary column. But it's important that I speak to this because Long Island has suffered once again the death of several outstanding individuals, and I would like to extend sympathies on behalf of myself and the wider community and the Bahamas to these families. Mr. Patrick Turnquest, who in fact has already been funeralized, Mr. Yulin Ritchie, Mr. Alfonso Scherer, and former police officer, Mr. Addington Darville, all outstanding Long Island people. I'd like to add to that, Mr. Speaker, I lost a cousin this week as well. Young woman, also died of cancer, just about the age of my sister, who I lost just over a year ago. My cousin Anastasia Butler-Moss. And Mr. Speaker, I also want to remember the life of Mr. Abner Pinder, an outstanding Free National Movement person. I think that our member for North Eleuthera has already memorialized and spoke about that. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to extend sympathies to all of these families, including my own, on the passing of these outstanding Bahamians, and trust that God will continue to keep them. Mr. Speaker, since we last met, we had a very successful regatta in Long Island over the Labor Day weekend, and while Long Island did exceedingly well, and Long Island showed herself to be the resilient island that she is in terms of our regatta site, Mr. Speaker, I was delighted to be there to see the magnificent work that was done by Long Islanders themselves, those in Long Island and Long Islanders throughout the Bahamian diaspora who came together to show that only 8 short months after one of the most devastating hurricanes in the history of the Bahamas, Long Island still knew how to put on a good regatta. Actually, I would say probably the best regatta. We actually had young sailors, young men and young women, girls and boys, and I've got to commend Exuma. This year, Staniel Key came over, and they actually took all of the Class A awards, and we were happy to have them. and the mainland Exuma, they did well. But my Long Island people, Mr. Speaker, they dominated Class B, Class C, Class D, and I want to commend them. And I trust that the vendors were able to make a few dollars. Somebody asked me yesterday, Mr. Speaker, if they were able to put up any money. Mr. Speaker, Long Island has been in such an economic downturn that I'm sure that if they made any money, which I suspect they did, that many of them probably were paying off existing bills and still trying to repair their homes and businesses from Hurricane Joaquin last year. Mr. Speaker, while speaking about Hurricane Joaquin, I'd like to say that the hurricane season is once again upon us. I think we're already to our fourth named tropical storm, and this is a harrowing experience for people who still, Mr. Speaker, have tarp on their roofs, have windows missing in their houses, and I am not bemoaning the fact that we didn't have a great outpouring of support from various community stakeholders, and of course, Mr. Speaker, the people who came and celebrated my 55th birthday with me, who donated very generously. But Mr. Speaker, the fact remains we still have a lot of rebuilding and restoring in Long Island. I spoke with one of my constituents just yesterday, and Mr. Speaker, one of my constituents said to me, they feel as if we've been cut off from the rest of the Bahamas. They want to know if we are actually a part of the Bahamas. And I say that, Mr. Speaker, not in reprimand, but in pleading that we do more for Long Island, Mr. Speaker, because one of the things that you can, and the Prime Minister always reminds me, Long Island people give back at all levels of this society. They make up the largest sector of mid-management people throughout this Bahamas. They are hardworking, they are committed, they are intelligent. Mr. Speaker, I beg, I plead every time. We still have our roads, Mr. Speaker, that are in a deplorable state. You look at some of our major main roads, the one that was done way back in the 1960s, O'Neill's, that went to the packing house back in the 60s. Mr. Speaker, if you don't have a all-terrain vehicle to go on that road, you're going to come out there with several flat tires. I implore the government, please, while you're doing all these roads in these high-end areas of New Providence, please, please remember that Long Island actually needs roads. The hurricane erosion, the seawalls, the boat ramps. Mr. Speaker, I gave a letter last year on behalf of the people of North Long Island, Millers, McCann's, and that area. They're still waiting for a boat ramp. I gave that to the Prime Minister. I know my people are listening to me. They told me to make sure and say it. I also gave it to the Deputy Prime Minister. They said they've gotten no response. Fishing is a way of livelihood in Long Island. I implore you, please, to do something. You know, Mr. Speaker, just a few weeks ago, the fisheries officers just arrived in Long Island since Hurricane Joaquin to continue assessments. Thank God to the Rotary Club of the Bahamas. Thank God for great donors. We were able to get the majority of our fishing vessels back into the water. Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about my constituency fund. For the first time in many years, I've expended the entire $100,000 in before the budget period was up, because we have used that money in conjunction with all the donations we received to make sure that we help people rebuild their homes, rebuild their lives, rebuild their boats. And Mr. Speaker, I can't wait for this budget to be over so I could start dipping into that next $100,000. So let me thank the Ministry of Finance. It's going to good use, it's helping Bahamians, and it's helping to put bread back on the tables for many people that are hurting. I heard the minister, I'm glad that I'm speaking behind her. Minister, I want to say to you, tell the rest of them, you and I both love the Bahamas, and I am not going to be contradictory of you. I'm going to give you some constructive criticism. So don't take it in the wrong way. Don't allow anyone to get between me and you. Let us just go right ahead and let's do what needs to be done so we take care of the people of Long Island. We do need more assistance in terms of what you can do for my people. We have people working for the government of the Bahamas. Yes, they've expended a lot of their money on loans to repair their homes, but you know what? Some of them cannot put food on their table. Minister, I'll provide you with names. You tell them, don't get you in my business, because we're gonna take care of the poor people. We have many, many poor people that need help. It can come to you too. And Minister for National Insurance, don't let them get between me and you. I want to say this to you, Mr. Minister of National Insurance. My colleague spoke to it. There are people waiting for their benefits. They are hurting. Please, even if you all have to write these checks manually, please help the people of Long Island. Please help the other Bahamian people. It's not negative criticism. Truly, it is for our Bahamian people. These are hard times. You know what they tell you? When people say the struggle is real, you know the struggle is real. So let's see how we could best help our people. And I really want to say that. Now, I do want to say a word of thanks. Thank you. Stop that clock, because I got plenty to say.
Member yields. The chairman recognized the member for Yamacraw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you for yielding, member. I just wanted to indicate that I don't think the member was in the chamber when I spoke to the food. Okay, so we do have the prepaid card coming to Long Island as well, and certainly, as I indicated, we would be willing to look at, once you get the names to me, we'll be willing to deal with them as quickly as possible.
I tell them don't get me
thank
in
you,
her
Honourable Member.
business. Mr. Speaker?
Member, you, point of order? Point of order, member for Mike House.
Mr. Speaker, the member, before, I wanted to do it before she started again.
Like me.
As the member for Yamacraw
You don't know your people?
had spoken to an issue, I want to do the same thing before she gets into her flow.
Who's she?
The member for Long Island. And so I do it with great respect. Mr. Speaker, she mentioned three things. The member mentioned three things that I think I should correct or expand on right now, because by the time her contribution is finished, when I speak tomorrow, the audience she has now will perhaps not be available to me. Number one, Mr. Speaker, the Hurricane Relief Program, never once has the member mentioned the government's effort. That's not right. The government has done a lot for the people of Long Island as it related or it relates to the hurricane. I'd leave it there. At least she could say thanks. Number two, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the Regatta Park and site, this minister, my ministry, contributed $50,000 to the regatta and $10,000 to help in the repairs of the regatta site. Not even thanks. No problem. I go further, Mr. Speaker. The fisheries assessment, Mr. Speaker, that she said was just recently either done or is doing. Mr. Speaker, that matter was before the cabinet about 2 months ago. And the figures which were projected by the paper was about $3 million to assist the fishermen and farmers. But, Mr. Speaker, because the first assessment was done immediately after the hurricane, when the officers of my ministry were unable to get to these various islands, the administrators assisted us. But the figures were not in keeping with the actual loss. It was more of generality. The cabinet wanted, I guess, more exact figures so they knew what they were working with. And they were asked to have it redone by name and loss. In other words, John Doe lost a 50-foot boat worth $2 million. That kind of exactness is what the cabinet required. But that paper was before the cabinet about 2 or 3 months ago. And we are hoping, Mr. Speaker, that the cabinet will be in a position in the next week or two to make its decision, because we believe that the exactness of the figures are now available, as I understand it. And the PS told me that she will be doing a new cabinet paper with the exactness of the figure that the cabinet has required. I just thought I'd say that before she gets into her flow.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Long Island.
You know,
Point of information.
Mr. Speaker, sometimes, because I'm enjoying the camaraderie and the collegiality between opposite sides, some people get prematurely bent out of shape. I was just about, Mr. Speaker, to thank certain ministers before the member from MyCal prematurely jumped to his feet because he wanted to be a part of the party. Now, Mr. Speaker, I was about to say my sincere thanks to the Minister for Bahamas Air, who actually put on 5 extra flights to get the people to Regatta as I had begged. And I'm so delighted because Long Island had a lot of people. I also was going to say thank you to the Minister of Tourism, who for the first time gave $20,000 to the regatta this year, Mr. Speaker. You see, the member from MyCal can be very premature at times. And now, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the member and the government from MyCal, and the member from MyCal, for all that he did. I didn't see him at the closing ceremony to thank him. He packed up his Georgie bundle and gone. And he had to send Exuma to show,
Very well on remember.
Speaker, at the opening ceremonies, the good member was not present. I was present and spoke. But I had to sojourn to South Andros to join the member for South Andros so that my duties became double. And I wish she would understand. I am not a Long Island, Acklands, Crooked Island. I'm a Bahamian minister. I'm all over the place. And I must be so.
Very well. Thank you.
That is so.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Member
Not
for
only
Long
does
Island.
he prematurely preempt things, Mr. Speaker, you know what? I said he packed his Georgie bundle, which meant that he was there. And no, I was not there because he was there on the Thursday. And we had important F&M business that Thursday night. And so I went that Friday. And so, Mr. Speaker, I was not there. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say thank you. I would like to thank the member for Exuma, who has not only Long Island ties, but he got Long Island wife. And so I want to thank him for doing the job of the member for MyCal. See, I want to say thank you very, very much. So, Mr. Speaker, I also want to commend the grads and the dads. We have had some amazing graduation ceremonies in Long Island, from primary school to high school. I was supposed to have spoken at the North Long Island High graduation, but Mr. Speaker, because of important business here in the Capitol, I actually had a substitute speaker, and that was Dr. Dwayne Sands. I heard he did an amazing job on my behalf. I want to commend the teachers, the principals, the faculty of North Long Island High, NGM, and all the schools throughout the island who had graduation exercises. And I trust these students will go on to be productive Long Island citizens like their predecessors. Mr. Speaker, I also had the occasion this year to be the graduation speaker at a private school here in Nassau. I was totally amazed at the level of academic achievement. Nassau Christian Schools. Pastor Mills and his team there invited me. They had an impressive ceremony at Loyola Hall, and I was able to speak to the graduates of that. And I just want to commend that school for the outstanding work that they're doing. Mr. Speaker, I want to also just throw in here that, like the member for Yamacraw, I'd like to dovetail a little bit with what she had said. And I must agree that we have some of the best persons in the Department of Social Services. I want to say a special thanks to them for the great work they did post-Hurricane Joaquin, and I will encourage them, please, to continue that ongoing effort because we still have people that are totally in need of help. And so, Mr. Speaker, with those particular acknowledgments, I want to say thank you. Mr. Speaker, I would like to get into the crux of this particular budget, which was presented some 3 weeks ago, the 2016-2017 budget communication. And Mr. Speaker, I noticed that the name of this budget, it seems like these are more PR exercises than they are matters of substance. Our budgets now have names. an agenda for a modern Bahamas. I thought about that, Mr. Speaker, and I decided to give my speech a name. My contribution for the 2016-2017 budget communication is for an urgent national turnaround. For an urgent national turnaround. Mr. Speaker, today I dedicate my remarks to three important goals. First, to reflect upon the key measures of the health of our country, which, when considered soberly, absolutely dispel the notion that this government has set the Bahamas on a positive track. Secondly, I wish to discuss the situation that the budget should have addressed urgently and with unprecedented focus, rather than the one the government did haphazardly address. And thirdly, and most importantly, Mr. Speaker, I should like to discuss what alternatives of which Bahamians could avail themselves were they to embrace a movement, a free national movement of deep reform, genuine change, and radical transformation to turn the country around. I believe, Mr. Speaker, this country is ready and waiting with bated breath for an urgent national turnaround. With that, Mr. Speaker, allow me to set the stage. In spite of the introduction of a regressive tax in the form of VAT, the country is under the pressure of an unacceptably high debt load. So high, in fact, that it seems that the IMF and the Central Bank of the Bahamas cannot even agree on how to measure our debt load. I'll tell you, for our central bank, our national debt ratio is estimated at just under 77% as of December 2015. However, the IMF estimates, and this is something just came out this week, this figure to be just under 67%. How is this? A whopping 10% differential between the Central Bank of the Bahamas and the IMF, who just completed this country's Article 4? While we can debate the merits of either number, my dear colleagues, one thing is clear. When it comes to financial management, we cannot manage, and we certainly cannot fix if what we have, we cannot even count. Mr. Speaker, this begs the question, where is the debt? Where is the money? And how will it be eventually repaid? Like so much else, we're left to deduce that the government simply does not know. It does not know how to improve our debt to GDP ratio. It does not know how to stimulate our economy. It does not know how to create the conditions for growth and job creation. It does not even know how to invest its resources, nor against what priorities to allocate those resources. In that regard, it may in fact be the case that the most important statistic to emerge from the last budget is the length of the speech. Mr. Speaker, let me repeat that. In that regard, it may in fact be the case that the most important statistic to emerge from the last budget is the length of the speech itself. A sprawling, at times incoherent, certainly indecipherable submission of more than 3 hours, devoid of focus, so mired in minutia that it took the Prime Minister almost 2.5 hours to address the single biggest business crisis in the Bahamas today, Bahamar. My colleagues may laugh, Mr. Speaker. They may even cringe at the veracity of this insight. Well, they may do so. So when I ask the Prime Minister, I have to ask, did he bury the agreement to form an agreement so deeply into his budget statement precisely because he knew that he would get caught delivering news about absolutely nothing? An agreement, to form an agreement, was buried at the back, at the tail end of some 3 hours of talk. This is no laughing matter, Mr. Speaker, not even a little bit. It is rather reflective of a government that has lost its way and has become unable to distinguish what is essential from what is a distraction, what is urgent and what is not. Bahamians want to know. The former employees of Bahamar need to know. And Bahamian investors in business that would serve Bahamar and its visitors deserve to know at what cost to our people will the Exim Bank be invited to take charge of this project. The fact that there is still no answer to this question, several weeks after the fact, is all the evidence we need to understand just how shallow the announcement of the agreement was. Let us go further. Let us ask a new question. It troubles me to say that another indicator of our economic health, the well-being of our tourism sector, is also of concern. Read the IMF report. Less for our performance against previous years, but more for the quality of our positioning against a rapidly rising Cuban tourism market. In this regard, the budget is once again thin gruel. And you know, Mr. Speaker, gruel don't stay on hill. People need something of substance in their stomach. Notwithstanding the annual list of family island tourism investments, which I must lament, is getting increasingly repetitive as the government just drags itself towards the end of its mandate. What, pray tell, is the government's plan to meet the intensifying competition from Cuba and other Caribbean destinations? What I recall hearing most frequently from the other side of the House are the assurances from the tourism minister that the rise of Cuba represents no risk to our economic interests. I might be inclined to forgive the minister and consider being more sensitive to his charming ways. But, Mr. Speaker, if the situation just was not so serious, he cannot charm me because it's that serious. The truth, my friend, is that we face far greater risks than high debt to GDP ratios or the rising threat to our tourism sector. Just last week, Canada issued another warning to its citizens. Mr. Speaker, through you, my fellow Bahamians, what I really want to focus on today are the most profound challenges before us. This is a time of unprecedented risk for our Bahama land, a moment of danger so poorly understood and articulated by the Right Honorable Prime Minister and his government that I am sorry to report that I do not believe, as a parliament, that we have sufficiently precise understanding of the challenges that our country is facing. Indeed, my fellow Bahamians, our country stands on a precipice. Last year was the deadliest in the history of our beautiful island nation, with 148 recorded homicides. Sunday past, the holiest day that we celebrate in this Christian nation, it was a bloodbath. Mr. Speaker, it started with Mr. Ivan Clare innocently going to an ATM to get funds, murdered. And then that night, 2 more families, Mr. Speaker, from Fox Hill, mourning the death of their loved ones. And then I read today in today's paper that crime is down. What world are we living in, Mr. Speaker? We've got to take our heads out of the sky, because if you ask any Bahamian, crime for them is very real.
Any billboards, sir, give me a reminder.
Sunday, Mr. Speaker, was a very sad day for the Clare family and for the senseless bloodshed of the 2 young Fox Hill men. Unemployment, which this government likes to argue peaked between 2007 and 2012, has reached new heights, Mr. Speaker. 16% of our citizens cannot find work. Worst of all, over 30% of our young Bahamians are being deprived of basic opportunities to fulfill their purpose and potential. Young Bahamians, Mr. Speaker. Our national education system is stagnant at best, and at worst, it is regressing. High school dropout rates remain unacceptably high, and the prospect of a career nurtured by a Bahamian education unspeakably bleak. To make matters worse, the poor service to our country by this government leaves many people angry and contributes to the growing cynicism about politicians. But I say to the Bahamians, better is expected, better is demanded, and better will be done soon, soon, soon.
Go ahead, baby. Speak, Long Island.
Our governance is a mess. Our reputation at an all-time low. Our citizens' confidence, well, it's non-existent, Mr. Speaker. How else can anyone in this House explain the staggering result of the referendum on June 7th? With a turnout below 40%, the result was not merely a rejection of the amendments to our Constitution, but a repudiation of the government as well as our institutions. And Mr. Speaker, I dare say, if the government goes to an election with this type of chaos, organized chaos, I suggest that there could be serious repercussions in light of any general election if it's held the way that that referendum was held. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, when I say to you, and through you, to my beloved citizens, that we are standing at the precipice, what I mean is this. We are already in the midst of a deep, deep social crisis. In the middle of a crisis that could cost us our most promising generation, and with them, our future. A crisis that is depriving us of the dignity of work and the hope of opportunity. A crisis, my friends, that has robbed us of our basic sense of safety, both real and perceived. Let that sink in, Mr. Speaker, just for a moment. Let that sink in. We are in an unprecedented crisis in this country. Now, let's take a step back from this reality. Take a step back, Mr. Speaker, and picture the kind of governance, the kind of leadership, the kind of turnaround that this country needs, and a kind of plan that you would give, and that you would actually give your confidence to. You need to see this crisis through, and to build a brighter future for our Bahamas, Mr. Speaker. But we need to imagine that better will come, and that we can do better. When we do this, Mr. Speaker, here is what we should collectively be able to envision. We should imagine a composed, self-disciplined, articulate, courageous, tough, and decisive leadership. One who reflects the generations and the aspirations of the country that they are here to serve. You must have a leader who has the determination to overcome, and the energy to act, and the discipline to plan. We should picture a government that leads by example, exhibiting the highest ethical standards, Mr. Speaker. That lets its results speak for themselves. Not spinning imagery, results from failed programs. A government focused on the priorities of our country: crime, job creation, and education. Mr. Speaker, a government that is focused on the priorities, I say, of our country: crime, job creation, and education. We should envision a plan that is reflective of this focus. A renewal of our national security establishment to force a collaborative approach. The Office of the Attorney General, the police service, the defense force, and the prison system to fearlessly enforce all our laws, big laws and small laws, big crime and small crime. We should foresee a national employment plan to accelerate private sector recruitment by supporting a single portal through which to post all information on job vacancies, and geared towards the renewal of our public service through the recruitment of our best and our brightest minds. Mr. Speaker, we need to engage the best and the brightest of our youth before they stay abroad and we continue this brain drain. We should aspire to an education system that embraces a mission to teach academics to our youth. Yes, but mostly one that empowers our youth by showing them how valuable each of their lives are, and in doing so, provides learning streams adapted to the skills and the interests of every student, everywhere, every part of our Bahamas. We should hope for democratic institutions, our public service, our courts, our 2 houses of parliament, and our cabinet, whose work is supported by world-class governance systems, policy development processes, as well as by culture of ethics and radical transparency. Instead, Mr. Speaker, Budget 2016 served as a painful, almost intractable reminder of where we actually are. And in this case, my friends, we do not need to imagine or project or hope. All we need to do is to open our eyes, look across the house, turn on the TV, or open a newspaper. We will see a desperate, a disorganized, a confusing, a hesitant, soft, indecisive Prime Minister, one whose best years, for which indeed we owe him our thanks, but they are his best years now behind him. A Prime Minister without a plan, exhausted by the burdens of his office, who has lost the nerve that once defined him. The gladiator is tired. He will lament a cabinet that has lost its way, favoring its friends in the hard wiring of procurement processes for friends, or mismanaging institutions such as the Bank of the Bahamas and contracts, forced to sell wishful thinking in place of tangible action and real accomplishments. We will strain to see any shred of a plan in this budget for turning around our Bahamas. Instead,
Very well. Member for Golden Gates.
Mr. Speaker, I really didn't want to comment on this, and I tried as hard as I could to restrain myself. When I read a communication the other day from the members opposite who accused this side of using that side as a punching bag, this can't be the same comments now being levied against us, when they admitted that what we were doing to them in terms of governing the country and how compared to how they did. Now they're saying something completely opposite. I saw a communication signed by 6 of them saying we continuously use them as a punching bag. Now she is saying something different.
Member, I don't understand. The chair didn't understand that at all, member. Member for Long
God
Island.
sometimes set them insane first, Mr. Speaker. I understand what's going on. But instead, Mr. Speaker, we see government blindly throwing money at the crime problem. An agreement to work on an agreement with China on Bahamar. A proposal for pennies on the dollar on mortgage relief. My friends, through you, Mr. Speaker, my fellow Bahamians, when, oh when, will we say enough is enough? What will it take to demand better of ourselves, of each other, and of our government? We owe our country, Mr. Speaker, better than this. We cannot accept the shambolic, intellectually bankrupt, hopelessly ineffective response of this government to the challenge we face today. We will, if we're not careful, sleepwalk our way to the decay and the destruction of our country. That said, Mr. Speaker,